Imagine this. A teenager, just 14 years old, suddenly becomes the most powerful man in the world. Not just any ruler, but the emperor of the Roman Empire. That teenager was Elagabalus, and his rise to power would change everything Rome thought. It understood about politics, religion, and even identity itself. Elagabalus wasn't simply eccentric. He defied every convention, scandalized Rome's elite, and pushed boundaries that made even the most liberal Romans gasp. Some called him mad. Others said he was possessed by divine madness. But what no one could deny was his impact. This is the story of how a boy from Syria became emperor, and why he's still remembered as the most outrageous ruler Rome ever had. Elagabalus was born as Varius Avitus Bassianus in 203 AD in the city of Emesa, Syria. His family was powerful and deeply embedded in Roman politics. His mother, Julia Soaemias, was part of the Severan dynasty, and his grandmother, Julia Maesa, was the sister-in-law of the previous emperor, Septimius Severus. But while his bloodline was Roman, Elagabalus was raised in the eastern traditions of Syria. He served as the high priest of the god El-Gabal, a solar deity worshipped in his hometown. That religious role would become central to his reign and to his controversy. When Emperor Caracalla was assassinated in 217 AD, power passed to a man named Macrinus. He was a military commander, not royalty, and his rule was deeply unpopular. Julia Maesa saw an opportunity. She spread a rumor that her grandson, Elagabalus, was the secret son of Caracalla. Whether it was true didn't matter. The Eastern legions believed it, and that was enough. In 218 AD, Elagabalus was declared emperor by the legions in Syria. A brutal battle followed. Macrinus was defeated, executed, and the 14-year-old boy from Emesa took the throne of Rome. Julia Maesa didn't just promote her grandson's bloodline, she promoted his divine role. Elagabalus wasn't just the heir of Caracalla, he was the chosen high priest of a powerful god. To her, this made him not only politically legitimate, but spiritually destined. Once in power, Elagabalus began blending his role as emperor with his role as priest. He wasn't content to keep his god in Syria, he brought the cult of El-Gabal to Rome. But this wasn't a soft introduction. Elagabalus marched into Rome with a sacred black stone, the symbol of his god, and placed it in a newly built temple on the Palatine Hill. He ordered that El-Gabal be worshipped above all Roman gods, including Jupiter, the king of the Roman pantheon. To Romans, this wasn't just heresy, it was treason against their culture. Imagine living in a deeply religious society where tradition is everything. Then suddenly a teenage emperor tells you to forget your gods and worship a foreign one, complete with wild Eastern-style rituals. Elagabalus insisted that everyone, from senators to slaves, participate in ceremonies honoring El-Gabal. He dressed in priestly robes, performed rituals himself, and demanded that even the most sacred Roman relics be moved to his god's temple. He even arranged for symbolic marriages between El-Gabal and Roman goddesses, as if fusing religions through divine wedding ceremonies. The Roman elite were horrified. This wasn't religious reform, it felt like cultural invasion. But Elagabalus didn't stop at religion. His private life soon became the subject of scandal across the empire. He married 5 times, highly unusual for a Roman emperor, but it was who he married and how he lived that raised eyebrows. One of his wives was a Vestal virgin, a priestess sworn to celibacy under penalty of death. By marrying her, Elagabalus shattered one of Rome's most sacred traditions, and that wasn't all. He openly had relationships with men, including a slave named Hierocles, whom he referred to as his husband. This wasn't a quiet affair, it was public, defiant, and completely unprecedented for a Roman emperor. He reportedly called himself the wife or mistress in these relationships, further scandalizing the conservative elite. Elagabalus's disregard for gender norms wasn't just performative. According to ancient sources, he wore women's clothing, applied makeup, and asked to be referred to with feminine titles. Some historians even claim he sought medical help to physically change his body, what we might today consider gender-affirming surgery. While the historical accuracy of these claims is debated, even the suggestion of such behavior was enough to send shockwaves through Roman society. No other Roman emperor had ever so boldly challenged ideas of masculinity, gender, or identity. Beyond religion and personal life, Elagabalus was infamous for his outrageous parties. He threw extravagant feasts where entire rooms were filled with flowers, food, and incense. At one such banquet, so many rose petals were dropped from the ceiling that guests reportedly suffocated. Whether this is literal or exaggerated, it speaks to the kind of opulence and chaos El-Gabalus brought to Rome. He was obsessed with shock value. He enjoyed pranks and cruel jokes, like seating guests on cushions filled with air so they'd burst mid-dinner, or serving wax or stone food to humiliate them. To Rome's elite, these weren't parties, they were acts of madness. In a society where women had little formal political power, Elagabalus went even further in challenging the status quo. He regularly involved his mother and grandmother in state decisions. But more than that, he reportedly considered forming a women's senate. This shadow government of elite Roman women would mirror the traditional senate. Unsurprisingly, this idea was seen as absurd and dangerous by Rome's male-dominated establishment. Even among progressive thinkers of the time, the idea of giving women formal political power was a step too far. With every new decision, Elagabalus made more enemies. The Senate resented him, the people mocked him. But it was the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's own bodyguards, who would seal his fate. His grandmother, Julia Maesa, seeing the writing on the wall, pressured him to adopt his young cousin Alexander Severus as heir. Elagabalus agreed at first, but when he saw that Alexander was becoming more popular than him, he tried to have him removed. That was the last straw for the Praetorians. In 222 AD, the guard turned on Elagabalus. He and his mother were dragged from the palace, murdered, and their bodies thrown into the Tiber River. It was a brutal end, but for many in Rome it was justice. Elagabalus's reign lasted just 4 years, but in that short time he shook the foundations of the Roman Empire. To his supporters, he was a spiritual revolutionary, a visionary who tried to unite East and West, to break down barriers of gender and tradition. To his critics, he was a monster of indulgence, a tyrant driven by ego, lust, and delusion. Historians today are divided. Some believe ancient sources exaggerated his eccentricities to vilify him. After all, Roman historians often hated emperors who didn't fit the mold. Others argue that even if half the stories are true, Elagabalus stands as one of history's most extreme cases of absolute power gone off the rails. But one thing is clear: El-Gabalus was unlike any emperor before or after him. He wasn't just a ruler, he was a walking rebellion against everything Rome held dear. And in that rebellion, he left behind a legacy that still captivates, shocks, and mystifies to this day. El-Gabalus was born into a world of strict rules about power, gender, religion, and identity, and he broke every single one of them. Whether seen as a tragic figure ahead of his time or a cautionary tale of youthful indulgence, his story remains a vivid reminder of how deeply society can fear the unfamiliar, and how power in the hands of someone truly unorthodox can reshape history in just a few short years. His name may be whispered with scorn in the history books, but the questions he raised about conformity, identity, and the limits of empire still echo today. That's the paradox of Elagabalus, hated by many, forgotten by some, but truly understood by very few.